This video is Chapter 10, The Roaring Twenties. This is the second video of the series, and again we are looking at Chapter 10, and it is over the Roaring Twenties. So let's make sure we get this right, the Roaring Twenties. Okay, so let us continue with our first slide of this presentation, and I'm going to try to keep it around 20 minutes or so. The first term, number 11, Frances Willard. The first term, Frances Willard, right there. One of the leaders of the Temperance movement, and this goes all the way back to the 1840s. The first really well-covered feminist meeting would be the Seneca Falls, which took place in New York in 1848. Since then, there have been a number of attempts by women's groups, and men, of course, are part of this, but primarily women's groups, to create a land, a country where liquor was illegal. Again, that's what temperance means. The temperance movement is an attempt to do away with the purchase of, the consumption of alcohol. In 1879, she was elected to the presidency of the National Women's Temperance Union, and their stated goal, was to end alcohol, production of alcohol, the sale of alcohol, and the consumption of alcohol, which takes us to the 18th Amendment. Passed in 1919, it banned the sale of alcoholic beverages. Now, a lot of people will give credit to World War I and the role that women played in World War I, and there is some truth to that. In fact, there's a lot of truth to that. But it's not the only reason. Women's temperance groups have been around for, by 1919, 130, 150 years or so, off and on. The Women's Temperance Union, which is mentioned previously, was a well-known national organization, and it had a large role to play with the 18th Amendment being passed. Now, did the role women play in World War I, their sacrifice, their leaving the home, going to take their husband, their father, their brother's place in the factories or in the fields, did that play a role in it? Yes, it did. Was it the only factor? No, it wasn't. But it was a big factor. Unfortunately, of course, the 18th Amendment was a huge bust. It was horrible. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment, and that took place in 1913. So between 1919 and 1933, we're looking at about 14 years. In those 14 years, we had Prohibition, which was a previous vocabulary term. It was illegal to purchase, it was illegal to manufacture, to purchase, to consume alcohol. It was repealed, Prohibition, 18th Amendment was repealed in 1933, that's the 21st Amendment. Partially was due to the fact that we were in the middle of a depression, and the government under FDR FDR being Franklin Delano Roosevelt, will take up him and the Great Depression in the next chapter. Hold on.
Migrant Club members,
All right, sorry about that. I am doing this after school, and I'm sure occasionally I'll be interrupted by announcements. If I do, I'll pause it and continue when they're over. So, the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we will talk about him in the next chapter. Number 14, the Scopes monkey trial. This was a well-known, highly publicized trial in which really what it boiled down to is a Tennessee teacher, a man by the name of John T. Scopes, who was a biology teacher, taught evolution. Evolution, the Darwinian theory, man evolving from apes, that kind of stuff, right? It was against the law in Tennessee to teach evolution. All that could be taught in Tennessee, according to the law, was creationism, the Old Testament Genesis. God created man, that theory. So, here we have, in the Scopes monkey trial in the 1920s, we have John Scopes teaching evolution, which is against the law. He is arrested. He is put on trial, and his trial attracted national attention. Was he guilty? Yes, he was as guilty as sin. He taught evolution in front of the principal, in front of, I believe, is the mayor and the police chief, so he was guilty as sin. However, the trial soon became not about his guilt. Did he break a law? The trial soon became about religious beliefs versus against scientific theories. Now, no matter how you slice it, many people believe that religious beliefs are just theories as well. Many people believe that scientific theories are just that, theories that have yet to be proven. And so we're looking at two things that at the moment had not been fully proven and may not ever be fully proven. Religious beliefs, and the key word here is belief, faith. You either believe or you don't. Scientific theories are just that, a theory, not a proven fact yet. So, was Scopes guilty? He was. He was found guilty, fined a small amount, I believe it was $100, which he never paid. A year or so later, the guilty verdict is overturned, and everybody moves on. But what is truly important about the Scopes monkey trial is that many people in the country who were vastly religious, very religious, particularly in the South, felt that they were being challenged, their religious views were being challenged by the scientific community, and that the Southerners, the truly religious, felt that they were being mocked. It drew national attention. Clarence Darrow, who was one of the, if not the best-known lawyer of the day, defended John Scopes in the trial. William Jennings Bryan, who we have discussed several times previously, ran for president 4 times, lost all 4 times. He was, hold on. I'm back. He was the Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, who resigned because Wilson would not ban overseas travel, which of course led to the death, in his mind, in William James Bryan's mind, led to the death of 128 Americans on the Lusitania. So he has had a colorful, lengthy career. He volunteered his services to act as the prosecutor against John Scopes. So here you had one of the great legal minds of the day, Clarence Darrow, who was at best probably an agnostic. He acknowledged the existence of God, but he did not believe in or worship God as the supreme being. And you had William Jennings Bryan, also a great legal mind, a great speaker, who was one of the leading authorities on the Bible. And so the trial, the Scopes monkey trial, became really religion versus science. Immigration Acts. As a result of the Red Scare, one of our previous vocabulary terms, it was determined that America would attempt to keep out immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, those new immigrants we have studied in previous chapters. We would keep them out through the passage of several immigration acts. Those acts were in 1921, 1924, and 1928. It was designed, these laws were designed to limit immigration from countries in Southern and Eastern Europe where it was believed that radicals would come from, and therefore, by allowing them to come to America, they would endanger America. They would endanger American freedom. They would endanger our nation physically through attacks like the bombings that A. Palmer Mitchell used as a reason to gather up radicals, which of course led to the creation of the FBI. All right, let us move on to the next slide, number 17 through 21. Eugenics. Oh, God, eugenics. This is kind of a weird little topic. By the way, it's still around today. Pseudoscience. Pseudo means kind of semi-science. A semi-scientific belief that the human race could be improved by breeding. Now, this is a fairly innocuous, benign, unmean definition. It goes further than that, and it believes in eugenics. Not only could you improve the American human race by breeding, but you should wipe out those who are inferior. In fact, there have been a number of people throughout our history who were believers in eugenics. One who's been in the news quite a bit lately, Margaret Sanger, forgive me, Margaret Sanger, was the founder of the Planned Parenthood. Now, of course, is in the news just not too long ago. Now, again, I realize that I am making this video on December 1st of 2015. Just 4 or 5 days ago, there was a shooting at a Planned Parenthood clinic, and that's why I mention it now, because in the news at this time, Planned Parenthood, of course, is one of the leading abortion clinics in the country. They have been credited with upwards of 60 million abortions from 1973, when abortion became legal thanks to the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, to today, upwards of 60 million. Sanger was very outspoken against the black race. She wanted to eradicate the black race through abortion. So what does all this have to do with number 17, eugenics? Well, again, she was a believer in eugenics and how you can improve the human race not only by breeding, but by eliminating those who are less, those who are inferior, in her way of thinking. Number 18, flappers. Flappers is a term used to describe women, young women in their 20s, who cut their hair short, wore short skirts, and I don't know what this means. We're part of the look. Scratch that out, okay? I don't know what that means. I got to figure that out. That doesn't make any sense, so scratch that out. So, flappers were young women who were away from home, possibly for the first time, who were out in the world trying to make a name for themselves, get a job. They cut their hair short. They wore short skirts. They showed more skin than ever before. We are just recently out of the Victorian era. The Victorian era was dominated by, in case of women's fashions, very conservative fashions for women. Women wore their collars up to their chin, wore their sleeves down to their wrist, and wore their skirts down to their ankles. Very little skin was showing except the hands and the face. That's Victorian fashion at the time. And so that period of time was ending as we start the flapper era. So women were wearing their skirts short to their knees or so, which, by the way, was a lot of skin for the day. Women wore blouses, shirts without sleeves, cut their hair short, which again was not the style. And so these women were characterized by these short skirts, these short hair. They drank, they smoked in public, they danced in public, which again was not a common activity for women, particularly young women who were not married. And so they created a new trend, and we will, if we have not already done so, we will look at some video of flappers, look at some images of flappers to give you a little better idea. Not all women were flappers in the 1920s. Again, it was a certain look, a certain style. And I suppose now that I said that, this kind of makes a little bit of sense if it was a little better written. The short hair and the short skirts were part of the look that the flappers were trying to get across. See, that makes a little bit more sense. Sorry about that. Number 19, Tin Pan Alley. A section of New York City, which was, again, New York is the largest city in America at that time, and it was sort of the center of a lot of things. Wall Street, the banking, the stock market, and a lot of things were happening there in terms of art and literature and music. So Tin Pan Alley was a section of New York, which was the area where songwriting and musical ideas mixed together to form American popular music. So we're looking at new forms of music, the mixture of different types of music to create a totally American style of music. And we'll talk about and listen to some music that came from Tin Pan Alley later on. Number 20, the Great Migration. About 2 million African Americans left the South, headed northward looking for work. Now again, most of these blacks had been working in the fields. Some of them may have been former slaves, or their parents had been slaves. And work in the South in the fields was growing a little bit more scarce. As new techniques were being created, as new inventions made farming less labor intensive, there was not a need for all the workers in the field picking and planting the crops. In addition to that, African Americans, which were vastly overrepresented as field laborers, by the way, working the fields is not a great source of income. Farming in general is not a steady source of income. Too much rain, too little rain, too cold, too hot, not enough insects, too many insects, tornadoes, hurricanes can all destroy crops just like that. And so it's a difficult proposition. And a lot of these African Americans were sharecroppers, and so they rented land that they would then pay off the person they rented the land from by giving them a percentage of the crop. And it's a huge mess. We discussed sharecropping before. But a lot of the blacks in the South saw a chance to move northward to gain steady employment in the factories thanks to the nearly 3 million whites we put into uniform in the late 19-teens. So whites were being drafted, whites were volunteering. Now again, we did have 100,000 or more blacks who hold on. I'm back. So the blacks, the African Americans, left the South, moved north looking for jobs that had been vacated by the whites who had joined the military. And again, this not only the African Americans, but also women. And we've talked about that previously. So this concept of these blacks moving northward, looking for steady work in the concept, thought I'd been kicked off, obviously not. The concept of moving north, looking for steady work in the factories appealed to a lot of them, and so they moved northward, which of course caused some other problems, which we'll get to, but overcrowding, for example, in certain cities, lack of labor opportunities, discrimination against them, and we'll talk about some of those problems as we go. Now, one of the things that occurred during this period of time, which was a good thing, was the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem, which is in New York, is a typically all-black section of New York. Again, we've talked about some of the ethnic areas of cities like New York, Chinatown, Little Italy, Germantown, so forth and so on. Harlem was one of them, and it was a typically all-black neighborhood, as it still is to this day. This area, Harlem, became the center of a cultural explosion of music, art, writing, and acting, and again, primarily within the black community. So we're looking at Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance, being an area where music, art, writing, and acting by black musicians, black artists, black painters, black sculptors, black dancers, on and on and on, where that community exploded and people outside the black community started paying attention. Now, this is what's important. When the white community started paying attention to black music, jazz, the blues, it took off. Because again, the white population was so much larger, so much more influential, so much more wealthy. One of the great examples of this was a place in New York City called the Cotton Club. And it was a location where white patrons would go to listen to black musicians, to watch black dancers, to listen to black singers perform. And the Cotton Club was just one. That's in New York City, probably the most famous, but there are others in other cities. So when the white community started paying attention to what was happening within the black community in terms of art, they started becoming more accepted universally, and they started to become better paid. More exposure, more people saw, more people heard, more people knew about them. Okay, what I think we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and stop it at this point. I really want to get this slide done, but I do want to keep these videos around 20 minutes or so, and we're pushing 20 minutes right now, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it. So what we just did was finish up the second, we just finished up the second video of the, let me write that, there we go, the second video of the chapter 10 vocabulary. Okay? We'll get to the third one tomorrow. So, chapter 10, the Roaring Twenties. We'll finish, or we'll start. This is over. The second one is over. We'll start the third one later on. Bye.